In the book of Matthew, chapter number 3, Yochanan the Immerser, John the Baptist, said this, and seeing many of the Pharisees and Sadducees come into his immersion, he said to them, brood of adders, translated, you bunch of snakes, who has warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Bear therefore fruit worthy of repentance. Shalom to you. This is Barry Phillips, along with my near perfected co-host, Mike Clayton, joining me for Foundations of Life.
Thought you had somebody else on there. You've been talking to my wife again.
Yeah, we'll make sure that Kathy sees this today. We want to talk one more time about an element of our salvation. You might be asking, why are you guys going on and on about being saved, redeemed, born again? That happened a long time ago. I'm observing, I'm doing, I'm obeying, and I'm waiting for the kingdom. Why do we need to go back to this? I think knowing your foundation at this present time is very important, and not calculating your standing based upon your actions. Sometimes we get into this trap, Mike, of believing, well, because I'm doing the right things, as far as I know, I must be in a right relationship. One more time, we have mentioned this text uncountable times, but in Matthew 7, Yeshua said, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I don't know you." And you think, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm acting well. I'm doing and carrying out the deeds as I'm supposed to. But working iniquity doesn't just have to be things that you do outwardly. It can be concepts and things that you entertain and accept within in your mind, in your heart, in your innermost being. So there's more to this than what we might first have believed. Mike, it would seem to me, and you and I have been talking about this a little bit previously, it's not pre-planned or rehearsed in any way, but our redemption is a covenant. And it is a covenant that requires fruit-bearing evidence. Yochanan the Immerser looked at these men in religious robes that were doing all of the ceremonial correct things, that were outwardly demonstrating what they believed to be the epitome of right standing. He called them snakes. He said, where is the fruit of your repentance? What fruit do you think he might have been looking for? What is the covenant response that you and I should be having because we've been redeemed?
Let me go back to this real quick. So these people, these scribes and Pharisees, and again, let's not lump everybody that was alive in that time. There was numerous sects of the scribes, Pharisees, and we're following various things. But this was a specific group of people that were making an assumption of their redemption.
Oh, assumption of redemption. Okay, yeah. I like that phrase.
Okay. They assumed that because they had a lineage, they were born into a specific job, a specific duty. They'd gone to the right schools. They studied under the right people. They assumed that, well, I guess that everything is fine. And so if you would have asked them, are you saved? Let's use our terminology today. They would have gone, well, I was never lost. I mean, I think maybe that's where we need to start this thing, going back to this Roman road of people talking, you go to somebody, are you saved? Do you want to get saved? Well, I never knew that I was lost. I mean, I know where I am. I'm not drowning or anything. And so it's kind of an assumption that since, I live in America, okay, or I live in, Canada, or what, I live in a pretty righteous area. I do some pretty righteous things. So evidently everything is fine. This may go back to what Billy Graham said many years ago when he was asked regarding redemption. He said I think maybe 1 in 10 people that are sitting in a church today are actually saved. And they came back later, and he said, I think I was a little optimistic. Give you an example. I was in Asheville yesterday. Had to go up to Asheville to pick something up. And I'm making my way back home, and I went by this church, Presbyterian church, and there's a banner out front, and it says welcome immigrants and refugees. We welcome immigrants and refugees, and it had a picture, the typical picture of Joseph and Mary on a donkey. Now, if I was to go to that church on a Sunday, which probably not going to happen, and speak and ask, well, is everybody here saved? They'd all go, yeah, because they don't understand what it really is to come into a relationship which is revealed to us in the word covenant. And so maybe the question we should be asking people is, are you in covenant with your Creator?
So a covenant, often, and we know the terminology difference, but even though we say that we know the difference, I think oftentimes it's confused as one and the same, the difference between covenant and contract.
Okay.
If I enter into a contractual legal agreement with you, I say that my part of the contract is I provide these goods, services, materials, etc., and you pay me, or you use these in such a way that it benefits me in return in some way. I'm going to end up my part of the bargain, and you hold up your part of the bargain, and we're both mutually benefited. When we come to the covenant, unlike this contract, cannot be renegotiated.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that my end on the contract, I incur greater costs, and therefore I'm making less money. And I come to you and say, we need to renegotiate this contract. It was based on information that is no longer correct and applies. When we come to a covenant, the covenant of Yah is such that, thank you, he's going to keep his end of the bargain, if you want to call it a bargain, his end of the covenant,
mm-hmm.
one way or the other, regardless, because he doesn't change. But I can block the flow of the benefits of this covenant to myself. I can walk away from the area which the covenant says, or I can walk outside the parameters of which the covenant operates. Mm-hmm. This covenant is designed to function a certain way within certain guidelines. Certain guidelines. This book, I start operating outside this book, then I'm basically shutting the door to the house where the covenant operates, and I'm somewhere else. The covenant's continuing mm-hmm. for all who are in it. And I may be sitting somewhere thinking, he don't care about me. If he did, I wouldn't be in this mess.
Yeah.
Well, Bubba, get yourself up out of your pig pen and go back home where the covenant works. Now, I know it's not a perfect analogy. I get that. So I'm going to argue, well, thus and such. But It's the idea of this covenant. Yah's going to keep his end of the covenant. The question is, am I going to be positionally correct enough that the covenant benefits me?
Okay, covenant. There's a reason why the scripture talks about a marriage. This is to teach us, and we go to Ephesians, and it talks about marriage, and it's to teach us about the relationship, the covenant. Intentional entering into the covenant. You, in your analogy of marriage, there are states that if two people live together for a period of time, I think Colorado is like 6 months, then it's considered a common law marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So just the fact that they've been living together for 6 months, in the eyes of the state, they're married and can share benefits and all those kind of things. So are there people that have assumed common law covenant with the Creator, but have never truly signed the document? I'm not talking about I'm not talking about a state marriage license. Okay, we're talking about the ketubah. Have they just kind of assumed, because we're going through the right motions, we're doing the right things, I'm doing the things that are here revealed to me? Well, it's obvious that I'm in covenant, but have never taken that step, which again Yochanan would say you must be born again. So in my mind, there needs to be an event that you can go back to in your mind and say, this is when this happened. If you take, again, to take the analogy of the common law marriage, when do you celebrate your anniversary? Well, I guess it was like 6 months after. Let's see, when did we move in together? I'm not really sure. And so there's always this kind of confusion over, am I really in covenant or not? So should we be able to, maybe not knowing the date specifically, but be able to go back to a time in which I can say, at this event is when I entered into a covenant of redemption with the Creator.
Mm-hmm.
Give an example. My cousin was going to a church, and the pastor, and she grew up in Sunday school and all kinds of stuff. And the pastor says, I want everybody to this week write down your testimony. Your testimony of when you were saved, in that terminology they would have used. And so she went home and took out a piece of paper and began to try to write something down, and figured out, I don't have a testimony. I just kind of assumed. I've kind of assumed my redemption through the years. Well, she went back to church the next Sunday and went through at that time, the prescribed methods of getting saved. Okay, but it was an event. So again, are people assuming redemption when they've never really been redeemed?
If you're talking about an event, I recall people testifying. We used to have testimonial time. The preacher didn't have a sermon and said, we're going to have testimonies tonight. Of course, you and I never did that, Mike.
Never.
No, never let it be said. I remember a man talking about coming under conviction of his sins, to a overwhelming situation where he pulled over on the side of the road and cried out for salvation on the side of the road. He could not drive any further to his destination. I remember a pastor, a very, very good pastor that I had. And his testimony was that he was sitting in a bar in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, I believe it was, in the military. And conviction came all over him sitting in a bar. And I forget the story as to whether he started praying in the bar or went home from the bar. But somewhere, as a result of that overwhelming awareness of his sins that hit him sitting on a bar stool, he got born again. There needs to be an awareness of the need for salvation to experience salvation, either because of the overwhelming sense of the weight and the conviction of your sinful living, or by the recognition of what Messiah has done for us and being drawn by his act of love. I'll never forget Laura and I pastoring our first church. Mike, I wish I could show you this little house that we lived in. 698 square feet, including the closed-in back porch. It was not very big at all. But Laura and I were in the kitchen, and Amber was my oldest daughter was about 4 at the time. And in those days, this is what she said. She looked at me and asked the question, "Daddy, why did Jesus die on the cross?" Mm-hmm. So I sat her down and told her why he died on the cross for us. Big tears welled up in her eyes. And this overwhelming sense of, I don't know if it was his love for her or what, her face began to swell up and turn red, and tears filling her eyes. She jumped from the chair and ran into her little bedroom and knelt down by her bed. And Laura and I stood at the door and watched her. And again, in terminology acceptable in those days, she told us, "I accepted Jesus into my heart." That was moved by a childlike belief and a realization that he loved her that much that he would die for her. You talking about an event, Mike. I remember what it was like when I cried out at age 16. I've been raised in church all my life. Oh, yeah. And I had prayed many times, and I'd had spiritual experiences, if you will, many times. But it was when I was 16 during a revival meeting. I remember the evangelist's name. I don't remember the date. But I remember sitting there realizing you played a religious game and it's time to stop. Mm. And in those days, as a teenager, your cool factor was very, very important. And I realized you've been trying to act a part depending on which crowd you were with. Yeah. With the crowd of teens here at church, you're one way, and with friends at school, you're back and forth, depending on which one. And it's got to stop. You're playing games. And I made up my mind. I remember sitting there on the pew thinking, I don't care who else will walk with me this way or not. Mm-hmm. Tonight, I decide this is my life. This is who I'm going to be. This is what I'm going to do. My life was changed from that point. I can talk to you about an event. You don't receive redemption or salvation through osmosis, as you said the other week. There has to be that definable moment where you enter into his covenant. I guarantee you, Abraham never forgot the night that he had the vision of the covenant between the pieces.
Oh, yeah.
That was radical, and it changed his life. So, well, I got saved somewhere back there. I don't remember how, I don't remember when, but it must have happened because this is the way I've been living for the last X number of years.
Can you imagine going to Abraham and saying, "So, are you saved?" And he said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." You talk about Amber. At 4 years old, you really haven't had a lot of time to commit gross sin. And that's where I think people kind of get to this place of, well, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of Elohim, and we've got to admit we're a sinner. Well, is entering into covenant with the Creator. Okay, there is an acknowledgement of who we are, and the acknowledgement is more of a I'm separated from you. It's not. It's not as much of, well, on this date I did this, and this date I did this, and I stole the ink pen from work and all that kind of stuff. But it's an acknowledgement of I realize that I'm separated from my Creator, that His breath is not flowing through me. I need to be connected to Him. And the way that He has provided for me to be connected to Him is through His death, burial, resurrection. At Hanukkah, Barry, we lit the candles. Okay, now Hanukkah's, everything's in boxes now and put back in the garage or wherever. But Hanukkah should be something that we carry with us. And to me, the greatest message of Hanukkah is found in the candles. And I'm not talking about the light for 8 days or the oil for 8 days, whatever. The very fact of the Hanukkah and how it is put together is that I've got them all over the place. I've probably got one somewhere back here behind me. But there's one thing. There's two things that are in common with every Hanukkah. Number one is the number of candles. Number two is that there's the shamash, that servant candle, which is higher than the others. And I did this we had a Hanukkah party at the house, and I explained this. The lighting of the Hanukkah is a picture of the gospel. For that one that is higher, we light that candle first. And that candle is then removed from its high position and kneels down, comes down to the other candles to bring forth light. That is a picture to me of what Messiah did. What Yah did for us is He came down from His high and lofty position in the form of a candle, a physical realm. It came down to provide us the light. That's a picture of the event of being connected once again with Him. Up until that point, we're just a bunch of wax that has no light. One way to look at it.
Standing around not doing anything.
Pretty much. What is the candle without light?
Yeah.
It's wax with a string in it. That's all it is. It has no value to it. What are you going to do? It just kind of sits there until it has light. And so all of these things. We're talking about we could talk about the talit, the shofar, the mezuzah, the Hanukkah, the menorah, and the temple. All of these things give us this picture of how the Creator is wanting us to enter into covenant with Him. Marriage is a picture of how we are to enter into covenant with him. And so when we go to the thing of, can you lose your salvation? Well, there is a thing in a marriage contract called, the D word. You can walk away from that. Even if the other spouse doesn't want you to, even if the spouse doesn't want you, you still have the right, the legal right to walk away from that contract, that covenant. So, to me, the once saved, always saved, the very fact of creation and what the Almighty has given us in these pictures of our redemption, that doesn't prove out that thing very well, does it?
Got my mind running in a few different directions, and I'm trying to figure out which train to ride here. The idea that Yah would offer to us a covenant. Mike, he could have simply said, if you are a physical descendant of Abraham, I know who you are, and that's all you need, and you're different than everyone else in the world.
And that's by the way, these people that you're talking about in Matthew chapter 3, they were counting on that.
Yes, a lineage.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he could have legitimately done that if that would have been his desire. I mean, he's the designer of this whole covenant family. He could have said, if you live in a certain area, he could have said, if you do certain deeds. But he said in that almost overpreached verse that he so loved the world that he gave his son, that whosoever will. If we're not careful in the studying of the Torah, and we read about how he said to go in and totally annihilate these peoples, these nations, there were certain groups that he said, don't leave one standing. And there were others that he said, you may take from them servants if you conquer them in a battle or in war. And then he talked about relating to the other nations. We haven't discussed that verse that says he's not willing that any should perish.
Mm-hmm.
As much as Yah has loved the Hebrew people, Am Israel, and we read about that and we are comforted because we see ourselves adopted into at least this group, and we're among the beloved, we can look out on those that we disagree with, especially in our current environment, those that are politically different than us, and we can make the summarization, he don't love them, not like he does me.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, Mike, he loves humans. He loves people. That's why it's important for you and I to have compassion upon people. They may appear radically, physically different than what we would be accepting of. Maybe they're covered in graffiti and piercings and weird colors, etc. And you and I look at that and shake our heads and say, that doesn't fit my model of what is the norm. But the Father loves them. And they have a heart, not just a beating muscle in their chest, but they have an inward being that can be touched by the same Ruach HaKodesh that you and I have been touched by. And if we give them truth and help them to understand truth, they can be as radically changed as you and I have been. Maybe even more so. If Yah had done it by lineage, most of us would be left standing outside looking in. But when he said this by covenant, he didn't just offer his covenant to Abraham and any anyone carrying his DNA, whosoever will. I'm going to make a way through my son for the redemption of those that are cut off and have been divorced from my covenant. I know who these lost sheep are. I know where they are. And I know how to redeem them and find them and pull them back to myself. And my son will provide that path and be their shepherd and lead them back to the flock. And if there are any other sheep out there, anyone else willing to be a sheep, you, by my covenant, can come and join in with this flock, and I'll accept you. How dare we raise our fist against the heavens and blame him for the tragedies in our lives or the upsets that we experience? And how dare we walk in the mercies of being included in his flock, abandon his flock at will, run off, enjoy some other pasture, and then come running back and join in the middle of the flock and act like nothing happened. This covenant that he has given us, Mike, is an act of extreme love. He could have done it so many different ways, but he chose covenant so that you and I would have a chance.
You know, the verse that our ministry is based on is Isaiah 56:6. The foreigner who has joined themselves to a shepherd. I get the picture sometimes. It's kind of like going to the pound and, you ever been to the pound to go get a dog?
Yeah.
And you normally walk in and you try to find the most obedient one, the one that wags its tail, the cutest one in the whole pound. But the truth is that that's not how the Almighty did that. He walked into the pound and found those that were unworthy. Those that, basically we could look at it like this. He got the most homely, unattractive mutts that the pound could hold and said, do you want to come to my house? I'd like to take care of you and love you. And you can be my person. You can be in covenant with me. That's kind of a silly analogy, I know. But sometimes that's maybe how we feel. And that may hold us back from truly entering into the riches of this covenant because of still seeing ourselves as the ugly dog in the pound. That he took me in because, he just kind of felt sorry for me. No, he took you in because he loves you.
Yeah.
And that can't be explained, Barry.
Let's cut to a very basic step here, Mike, that we haven't really described. I'm feeling and sensing that we need to do so. Coming into covenant, walking in agreement with him, having an event. If someone has not had the described event, they're sitting with you, you're describing your event, how it happened for you, and they look at you and say, I don't remember anything like that. I don't know. I've been trying to live in a covenant that I haven't ever accepted. What do they need to do? What does the person sitting with you need to do at that moment to enter into that covenant?
I think it's been complicated. I think this is all, religion has tried to complicate this as much as anybody, as much as anything else. And that's kind of what religion does. To me, I would look at a person and say, do you understand that you are out of covenant? That you were born in sin. And if the person, doesn't acknowledge that, then we really don't have anywhere to go. Until a person is understanding that they're out of covenant. You can't, you really don't have anywhere to go. But with that, I would just simply say to a person, do you understand that the Almighty Himself came to this earth to die for you so that you can be connected with Him in that covenant again? Okay, and see, this is the Roman road. For all have sinned and come short of the glory. While we were yet sinners, He died for us. If we confess with our mouth, believe in our heart, and those are the words of, that's the, I would translate those words a little bit better, maybe. But just to say, then let's stop and ask Him. You ask Him. People say, well, you pray for me. No, I'm not going to pray for you. I can't sign your marriage contract for you. You have to sign it. So you pray. And maybe it's just simple words. Maybe it's words that you're uncomfortable with. That's fine. Look up to the heavens and say, Father, I thank you that you have provided a way in Messiah Yeshua for me to come into covenant with you. Would you now bring me into that covenant? Is it any more difficult? People can use their own wording, whatever. Is it really any more difficult than that, Barry?
No, I think the basic idea is acknowledging, as you said, your sinful state outside the covenant, acknowledging you have a covenant for me to enter into. I'm accepting of that covenant. I ask you to bring me into this covenant. And I acknowledge that Yeshua is the Messiah, the promised one who is my Redeemer. And based on what He did for me, I accept your covenant and I want to live in your covenant. I mean, it doesn't take, I guess we ridiculed some who feel like, well, you can pray a 30-second prayer and forever be changed. But yeah, you can. Now, there are other things that I think are necessary. You need to know, you need to learn His word to know what to live, what the covenant says. You need to be immersed in the name of Yeshua. You and I would encourage him, you need to ask Him to fill you with the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And you need to be a part of a congregation somewhere. You need people around you to help you to grow.
You need to be connected with like-minded people. Well, let's look at it this way, Barry. We're running out of time here. Maybe instead of saying that this is what we've been talking about for the last few weeks, instead of saying it's the Roman road, maybe we should call it the Roman on-ramp.
Yeah. Good word, Mike.
Yeah, it's the on-ramp. But if you get to the end of the on-ramp and you stop, guess what?
You're going to get hit.
That's your destination.
Well, folks, there are other roads that we want to, explore. We'll be talking about those maybe next week. Other travels that we need to take, other experiences that we need to have. We'd love to hear your comments on what your salvation experience is. Not looking for a book here, but if you can tell us, how it happened for you, your suggestions and leading someone to accept Messiah and enter into His covenant, your questions on these things. We love hearing from you. So don't be backward and sending in your comments at the end of the video. And we do appreciate you watching very much. Thank you so much for just taking time to watch these.
And maybe it'd be a good assignment. Sit down and start to write out a testimony just so you can make sure that you have one.
Excellent point.
All right, Barry, take care. Hey, Happy New Year.
Hey, same to you.
All right.
Shalom, everyone.